Today we're diving into just 6 verses from the Quran's second chapter, Al-Baqarah. But trust me, in this short passage from verse 96 to 101, a whole story unfolds. It's like watching a chain reaction of spiritual challenges, starting with something as relatable as worldly greed and ending in this ultimate act of rejecting divine truth.
So, here's our roadmap. It all kicks off with a really deep attachment to worldly life. From there, we'll see how that one thing can spiral into hostility toward the divine message itself, which then hardens into a flat-out denial of truth. Then, we'll explore how this leads to a history of broken promises, and finally, the really shocking act of turning away from their own sacred texts. Let's jump in at the beginning.
So, where does a spiritual problem like this even begin? Well, according to verse 96, the root cause is this profound, almost desperate attachment to the life of this world.
And the claim here is pretty stunning. The text says, this group is more greedy for life than anyone, even more than those who worship multiple gods. You know, this desire for an impossibly long life isn't just a simple wish. It's being presented as a symptom of a much, much deeper spiritual sickness.
And just look at that number, 1,000 years. This isn't just a passing thought. The Quran is framing this extreme desire as proof of a deep-seated fear of what comes after death. But you know, the verse immediately cuts that hope short, making it crystal clear that no amount of time in this world can save a person from their ultimate accountability.
So, what happens when someone is that attached to worldly life? Well, the passage shows that it doesn't just stay a private feeling. It actually morphs into outright hostility, and not towards just anyone, but towards the very channel of God's message.
And now the conflict gets a name, an enemy of the Archangel Gabriel. The Quran's response is so swift and direct. Hey, Gabriel is just the messenger, acting on God's command. And this message, it isn't some random new thing. It's a confirmation of the scriptures they already have.
So you might be wondering, why the hostility toward Gabriel specifically? To get some context, we can look at Islamic scholarly interpretation, what's known as tafsir. It explains that some groups had basically created their own distinction. They saw Michael as this angel of peace and mercy, but they viewed Gabriel as an angel of severity and war. And because the Quran was revealed through Gabriel, they rejected it.
And then verse 98 raises the stakes, like dramatically. The argument is really simple. You don't get to pick and choose your favorite parts of the divine. Being hostile toward any of God's messengers or angels is treated as being hostile toward God himself. And the verse wraps up with this incredibly chilling warning. This kind of selective belief makes God an enemy to those who disbelieve. Okay, so this leads us to the real core question of the passage. If the message is from God and the messengers are his, why is it still being denied? The very next verse gives a diagnosis that's not about ignorance, but about character.
The verse is so emphatic about this. The revelations sent down are undeniably clear. So what does that mean? It means their rejection can't just be blamed on confusion or some simple intellectual disagreement. Nope, the text points to a totally different cause, one that's tied to a deliberate choice.
And this is where a really key Arabic term comes in, fisk. Now, this isn't just a casual sinner or someone who makes an honest mistake. A fisk is someone who knows the rules and deliberately, willfully chooses to break them. So the denial being described here isn't coming from a place of ignorance. It's coming from a place of rebellion. This inner state of rebellion, this fisk, well, it doesn't just stay on the inside. The passage argues that it starts to show up on the outside as a repeated, destructive pattern of behavior. The verse asks this powerful rhetorical question, right? It's like, come on, isn't it true that every single time they make a promise, a whole bunch of them just throw it away? This pattern of breaking covenants, whether with God or with other people, is tied directly to a fundamental lack of real, genuine belief. And you can really see the cycle here. Step 1, a covenant is made. Step 2, a faction within the group just decides to ignore it. And step 3, this violation becomes a repeating habit. The passage portrays this not as some occasional slip-up, but as a core characteristic that comes from a deep weakness in faith. So now we get to the absolute peak of this whole chain reaction. This is presented as the ultimate act of rejection, not of some new message, but of the very truth they were supposed to be guarding.
So get this. What happens when a new messenger finally arrives, someone who actually confirms their own scripture? Instead of embracing it, a group among them does something just shocking. They're described as taking their own holy book and literally throwing it behind their backs.
I mean, the imagery here is just incredibly powerful. This isn't about forgetting something or being unaware. That phrase, as if they did not know, implies the exact opposite. They knew. They knew what was in it. The act of throwing the book behind their backs symbolizes this conscious, deliberate choice to ignore the truths in their own scripture, all because a new truth arrived that challenged them.
All right, so let's zoom out for a second and pull all of this together. What are the key takeaways from this powerful, cascading chain of events we've just walked through?
It all begins with an excessive love for this world. That love then fuels an enmity, a hostility, toward the divine message. This hardens into a willful denial by those described as fisk, which then shows up as a pattern of breaking covenants. And it all culminates in the ultimate betrayal, knowingly neglecting their own sacred scripture. And this is really where the passage leaves us. You know, even though it's describing a specific people in history, it points to a timeless, universal human challenge. It forces all of us to confront that gap that can exist between knowing what's true and actually acting on that truth. And really, that's a question for every single one of us to reflect on. How do we bridge that gap in our own lives?